Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 250 of Humanity Rising. Today is a very somber day. 1 year ago, on this day in Minneapolis, Minnesota, George Floyd was kneed to death by a white police officer, Derek Chauvin, recorded by a young 17-year-old Black girl who was on her way to the store with her little sister in an event that became a global, iconic expression of racism at its worst, at human dignity, under duress, as George Floyd, with his face in the concrete, pleaded for clemency, cried out to his mother, and not just his mother, but the mother of all things, the mother of life, gasping, "I can't breathe." Derek Chauvin kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for a full 3 minutes after George Floyd was dead. And communities around the United States and around the world literally erupted. Some have said it was the largest mass outpouring in more places with more people than any event we know of in history. The response to the death of George Floyd. And here we are 1 year later, the reverberations of his death still crescendo around the world. And so let's just take a moment before we dive into the program today and just simply breathe. Let us center ourselves in our bodies. Let us take a few deep breaths. Let us listen to our heartbeat. But let us just simply breathe in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that we're alive, that we can breathe. And that great souls like George Floyd grace us with the immortality of their acts. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to welcome back to Humanity Rising Dr. Caroy Ferguson. You've seen him before. He's convened a number of panels for us. You recall that he got his PhD in psychology at Boston College. He's a tenured professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston now. He was the past president and co-president of the Association of Humanistic Psychology that was founded by Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers back in 1962. He's written numerous books and articles. He's a practicing psychologist, psychotherapist for over 35 years, very deeply involved in human renewal, in race relations, and in how people can develop a more humane approach to their own life and to the process of community building. So Cuff, welcome back to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's a pleasure to be back on Humanity Rising and to see if we can share some thoughts about what you've called a sobering time. And indeed it is. This is one of these times in history where we have to honor and respect the souls that are at play in particular dramas. And this was a profound drama that was unfolded in front of our eyes. And so what we've tried to do is to bring together today a few folks that I've been in the trenches with over the years, trying to do things with race relations, social justice, restorative justice, and to see if we can have some dialogue and some sharing from our truth. I've asked each of them to simply talk with you about their truth and their perspective about the murder of George Floyd, and also about the issue of being a Black male and Black masculinity, and any other relevant thoughts that they may have pertaining to this particular subject. I have to say up front that one of our panelists may have a little bit of difficulty joining. There was a little miscue around the timing, so he may be joining in with us a little bit later. Nevertheless, I'll introduce him and introduce the rest of the panelists, and then we'll see where we go. So I'm going to ask Dr. Kamara and Dr. Vandermeer to turn on their the videos so that I can introduce them and you can see them. And then we'll just proceed from there. I just want to introduce them. And then if our first panelist who was supposed to talk first isn't here, we're going to turn to Dr. Vandermeer first to share his thoughts, and then turn to Dr. Jemadar Kamara, and then I'll bring up the rear. And hopefully we'll have some time to do a discussion between either the three or the four of us about our various thoughts and any questions that may come up in the chat that you may have. We're going to start off, however, after the introductions, with a video to try to set the tone, try to set the context of what this is all about, what this drama was all about. And then at some point, we're going to close the session too, also with a video, and both are songs. And songs have a way of touching the soul. So we want to see if we can do some of that. So let me introduce at least the two panelists I have with me right now. I'll say something about the first panelist who may be joining us. The person who's not on with us right now is Reverend Dr. Kevin Peterson. He was with me on one other presentation, and he's the founder and executive director of the New Democracy Coalition, which is a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization that focuses on civic engagement in Massachusetts and in fact across the United States. He's been involved with a lot of reconciliation and race relations types of issues over the years. He's also a Christian minister, and he practices what he calls public theology in the ethical tradition of Jesus, Gandhi, Ella Baker, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So hopefully he will join us. If not, we'll just continue on. Then we have Dr. Tony Vandermeer. He has his PhD in leadership and change from Antioch University. And he also is a colleague of mine at University of Massachusetts, teaches in the Africana Studies program there, and wrote a very profound piece. I had a chance to look at it, Tony, on spiritual journeys. I can't even pronounce it. The study of Ifa and Orissa practitioners in the United States, initiated in Nigeria. I'm going to call y'all by your first name because that's how I know you. I know this is a public forum, but Tony has been actually a social justice activist for over 40 some odd years. And as I said, we've been in the trenches together around many, many different projects. He's also a practitioner in the Yoruba belief system, and studied under Dr. Wande Abubola. In addition, he received certain honorary accolades for a variety of roles in that tradition. So we're very honored to have Tony, Dr. Vandermeer with us this morning. The other panelist is Dr. Jemediah Kamara. He also has a PhD from University of Michigan. He's a former dean, actually, at the university. He's a colleague, longtime colleague there. And he's a former multi-time chair of the university's Africana Studies Department, and is also an associate professor on campus. And more profoundly, he's the founder founding director of the Center for African, Caribbean, and Community Development on the campus. Over the years, he's been a director of places like the William Monroe Trotter House at the University of Michigan. He chaired the African and African American Studies Department at the University of Michigan. He was a Fulbright scholar, I think twice over, right? Twice over, Fulbright scholar. And he helped to found and continues to coordinate what is called the annual Martin Luther King Amilcar Cabral Commemorative Program, which takes place on our campus, but is open to the community. And he also developed collaborated in developing the Community Action Information Network, and has just been involved with numerous, I can't even begin to mention all of the numerous community activities that he's engaged in. He's also a publisher, author, and his newest book is called The Interrogating Gaze, Resistance, Transformation, and Decolonizing Practice, which will be coming out shortly. But he also has a number of other publications. So these are the folks that I'm going to be talking to, who will be also sharing their thoughts with you today. And but to set the context for what we want to try to do, we're going to share with you a song which is titled "I Can't Breathe." And it was it's sung by her, which some of you may know or may not know. But I'm going to ask Rich, if you can tee that up for us and share it, I'd very much appreciate that. Well, there you have it. Okay. That song was put together, actually, believe it or not, 5 days after the murder of George Floyd. And the reason why I wanted to share it with the audience here is that it captures, to a large extent, the kind of flavor of the underlying feelings that are at play, both in terms of the creative tension having to do with race relations, as well as the potential for change. And we're trying to look at this from a deeper point of view. What are the deeper underlying themes that are at play, which is urging humanity right now to say, it's time. It's time to reckon with race relations. It's time to understand what's been happening in this drama. And so toward that end, I've asked our 3 panelists, and welcome Kevin, to join me in sharing thoughts with you about any deeper meanings that they attribute to the murder of George Floyd, and what their experiences may be like as Black males, and any other collateral thoughts that they may have that might shed some light on this particular subject. So I know, Kevin, you joined us late, but I have you going on first. The last is first. So if you want to turn your mic on, we'll tune out and have you to share your truth. Share your truth.
Thank you.
Around this particular subject.
Thank you, Professor Ferguson, and to Dr. Jimidari Kamari and Dr. Vandermeer. What a pleasure it is again to be in your presence virtually, and what a pleasure it is to be in dialogue with you. Thank you for the platform and for the university for this this hour of reflection. It was a year ago today, in the proximity of this present hour, that George Floyd, a large middle-aged Black man adorned in a black halter top t-shirt, entered a local convenience store to make purchases with a $20 bill, about which the store accountant called it dubious money. Moments later, Floyd lay prostrate on the ground with the right knee of a local law enforcement officer on his neck. The pressure, excuse me, I got a little bit of problem here. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I can't see you, but I'll go on. The pressure put upon Floyd's neck was purposeful and unrelenting. The officer applying the pressure was a picture of calm. Placid determination was the mask he wore. A man doing his job, a man in blue, beating out what he thought was due, a white law officer placing a menacing Black subject into a certain powerlessness and then into the throes of unfortunate death. The subject cried and begged, struggled and pleaded, bemoaned his fate, called out to his dead mother at the point of painful, suffocating reckoning. It was a year ago today, in the proximity of this present hour, and the global eye of humanity watched the execution of George Floyd. His death was brutal, unimaginable, unimpeachably, uncompromisingly unkind. And we watched, but we could not watch. What we saw was incredible, incredulous. We were made to witness unadorned callousness. We grazed upon George Floyd writhing body. We observed unembellished barbarity, abominable atrocity as life left his body. We stood as bystanders to what has been over the course of centuries a mad ritual in American life. The lynching of a Black man, his castigation, his castration, his condemnation on the basis of his color and his kind, his consignment to the status of a thing, his body treated as mere fodder and the human flotsam and jetsam of the American way. We watched, but we could not watch. And how could it be any other way, given the mentality to which whites have determined the reality of Black men in this nation? In their mind, in the mind of whites, Black men are the enslaved, and they will ever be. They are the legacy of people put to work by others because they were deemed animals, and it seems that at the moment they will ever be. They were Black men in the minds of whites made inhuman, and perhaps they will ever be. They were bestial and brutish, unbecoming of being. In the minds of whites, they did not matter. This has been the history. And it does not seem likely to many that this will ever change. And the death of George Floyd reminded us of yesterday, of strange fruit, a Black body swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from poplar trees. And so we witnessed in the agony and the cry of George Floyd, we also noted the global eye of humanity gazing upon yet another indescribable act within which the unforgiving carnivore of hate put upon Black men and the Black male body in this country, which purports to be a democracy. And George Floyd was Sam Hose and Emmett Till and Freddie Gray and Trayvon Martin. He was a proxy for all of them. He was their metaphor. He stood as a human trope, George Floyd. He suffered their affliction, which was on yesterday, and George Floyd suffered the affliction of Black men, perhaps tomorrow. George Floyd is the embodiment of the menace that whites have placed upon the Black male body, but also the Black female body. This hate remains a searing hate. The white hate is sincere, and we ask, what can we do? And on this day, in the proximity of this hour last year, we reflect on the present state, on this day, the present state of the nation, how it treats Black men, how it projects such unvarnished invective against men like George Floyd, like me, and like others, how it casts Black men into a social hell. And we wonder how we got over, how will we get over, and how will it end? I'll come back for remaining remarks.
Thank you so much, Kevin. There are a couple of questions that came up, but we'll save these for a little bit later.
Okay.
And tie them in with some of our discussion. Okay, let me turn to Tony. and get your comments, remarks regarding any deeper meanings that you took from George Floyd's murder.
Well, thank you, Cuff, and it's an honor to be on this program with you and Jimmy Dari, and both whom I've worked with, and it's been an honor to work with, who I've learned a lot from. It's good to hear from Kevin, who I've also worked with, and we've done a lot of good work together in the community. You played that piece about I Can't Breathe, and I want to make a comment that, that the notion of I Can't Breathe is in many ways a global historical novel of Black oppression and colonization. And that George Floyd saddens me in the sense that it musters up a historical trauma in terms of what, as Black people, as African people, we've experienced in the world. It saddens me because in some ways, people see George Floyd as something new and alarming. And, when I think of the history of Black oppression and genocide, I think of that experience of African people who were packed into ships and who were treated in ways worse than they treat dogs. The horror, the trauma that they had to experience. And that sometimes we get into this data piece about how many Black folks were shot and so forth, but the uncountable people whose bodies litter the Atlantic Ocean is something that it seems that it doesn't exist in imagination or in the mindset of people in terms of this important history. And so even in terms of the formulation of these United States, that they regarded us as 3/5 of a person. And then on top of that, the Supreme Court of the land said that Black people had no rights, that white people were bound to respect. Supreme Court decision. And so when we talk about We Can't Breathe, is that America has always had a knee on our necks. And in fact, that was the generous treatment in terms of what they have done to Black people. That is etched in our psychology. The sad part is that this is alarming and new for many people. And so it means that there's a sort of historical amnesia that exists in terms of how Black people feel. I mean, it's saying that we have no worth, that we have no value. And so when we look at the society now in terms of an attempt to address structural racism, that it becomes very performative versus something in which people are trying to reconcile with and bring about justice. But for Black people, and I can say this globally, is that the question is not about assimilating us, it's a question of Black people having to having the right to self-determination, to decide for themselves what it is that they want and how they want to live. And so this is a deeper question, not one of just being, a so-called Americans. I mean, Du Bois helped us with some of that. But it's because it is just not in America that their knees are on our neck. Their knees are on our neck in Brazil. Their knees are on our neck in Venezuela. Their knees are on our neck in Cuba and in Colombia, where they have large populations of Black people, in which whenever there's a story told about what's going on, it talks about some dictator or somebody's trying to bring in communism or something very abstract, but not the fact that people are violating their humanity, that people are violating their fundamental human rights. We live in a country in which the US government has put an embargo on people of Cuba, people who look like me, people who can't get basic healthcare needs and other, even though Cuba has been wonderful around healthcare, but the basic material needs that they need to coexist. You can't send remittance to your family in Cuba. This is how you strangle people. How do you create the basis for them not to be able to breathe and to live? But we are talking about this. Nevertheless, what has happened with the Palestinian people? And then they want to say, well, it's terrorists and who is creating these atrocities and so forth. So they are flipping the script on us and not helping us see what's happening, in the world and restricted to these borders. George Floyd represent the assault on the global humanity, not just in the United States, but more particular the impact of anti-Black racism in terms of how they see people who are darker than them, based on this false premise that Black people are inferior and white people are superior, which is completely erroneous, right? And so we have to address the question of whiteness, because when we talk about what's happening, particularly with Black males and Black masculinity, is that what they've done to Black humanity, in terms of doing that, and why? Because the question becomes, is that where did we all come from? What is our common heritage? And how is it that we aren't, that in this educational system, particularly in the United States, that people don't understand that? And so what saddens me is the fact that even after all of these atrocities before George Floyd, and then with George Floyd, that we're still waiting for changes that we should have had almost 100 and something years ago, over 200 and 300 years ago. And so it's almost like we're waiting for the next George Floyd. Or we're waiting for the next response or the anger of people to light a match and burn things down. And so, we have to begin to look at our own privileges and how do we begin to look at that in relationship to those who've been denied their basic human rights and what we need to do to equalize that. Dr. King talked of the urgency of now, but we say that rhetorically, but we don't act in terms of trying to create the structural shift that's necessary to put the resources where they matter in order to change the things that need to be changed. And so we're only producing a more possible volatile situation. It's like we're waiting for the next explosion. James Baldwin said the fire next time. Well, the fire is over. It's going to be cataclysmic because you cannot continue to treat people like dogs and don't expect them to bite you. So we have a long way to go, and we have some deep reflections to make. And it's about trying to get people to do the kind of internal change that's necessary. But that's on an individual level, but on a systemic level, right? We all have to begin to stand up and say, no more, not on our watch. Because when we don't do that, then that means we all have to account for the atrocities that's happening to Black people. And I'll stop there because I'll go on and I'll be taking up Jimadari's time, and I'm sure you have some wonderful remarks to make as well.
Thank you, Tony. Right. Jimadar, you want to add your comments to us?
Well, thank you, Cuff, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to share this panel and the conversation with you and Kevin and Tony. I think it's a very important one, and often we get so caught up in our activism in the community, we don't get to have this kind of conversation with each other. I appreciate both Kevin and Tony laying out the framework for this conversation and referring to that which happened with George Floyd in the metaphor that it is for the condition we find ourselves in. So much has occurred this past year, and it is a very complex circumstance that we find ourselves in. And I'd like to try to push our conversation to a discussion and a dialogue as we move forward to some issues of solutions. But understanding fully the context, I think will help to guide the nature of our consideration of these potential solutions. As we are reflecting on George Floyd, the dynamics that occurred, there's the context of the dual pandemics within which this occurred. Because part of the impact of the George Floyd killing was the fact that it was in the midst of a pandemic, when hundreds of millions of Americans and people around the world were locked into their own chambers. And they were forced to view, as if looking in a mirror, at this action on their television. You were forced to see what happened. And time again, you were forced to watch the 9 minutes and 29 seconds before your eyes. And during this year, if in fact you continue to follow in any way this dynamic circumstances of the trial of Derek Chauvin, you were told you didn't see what you saw. That was not homicide. That was not a murder. In fact, when you looked in Derek Chauvin's eyes and in his face, that was the face of the defiance of power, saying, I can do this to you, Black man, and there's nothing that you can do about it. I have done it for the last 400 years, and I will continue. There's nothing you can do about it. And that face was reinforced by the ideology of the power that was held in this country by the executive, who reinforced those ideals. It was the manifestation of the very same people who have declared that Columbus discovered America. It's the very same ideal. It's the very same power. The power of white supremacy. Now, that's what we have to confront, because it is this question squarely of white power and how it has become manifest globally that we have to consider. The manifestations that George Floyd brought to our screen, which was a confrontation with the expansion of global capitalism. That's what that represented. There's another irony of today. I saw when Jim opened that this is the 250th day of the Global Community Summit. And I think I don't believe in coincidence. Today also happens to be the 50th anniversary of African Liberation Day. And in 1963, on this day, the Organization of African Unity declared this as African Freedom Day. 1972, the largest demonstration in support of African liberation in this country occurred. And around the continent, globally, African Risings is having programs around the continent and in the United States, focusing on African liberation and the liberation of African people. And unless we believe somehow in the genetic inferiority of people of African descent, if you look at the Human Development Index of the United Nations, nearly 3/4 of the least developed countries in the world are either in Africa or led by people of African descent. Now, unless there is a genetic inferiority of Black people, there must be some structural reason why people of African descent globally, as Professor Vandermeer was referring to, are somehow in the relationship to the human development indicators always at the bottom, and have been pushed and remain at the bottom of the global scale of human development. I would suggest to you that as George Floyd laid on the streets of Minneapolis and cried out for some form of mercy, that indeed Black people globally are crying out for some form of respect and will continue to challenge for power, whether it is in their local community, in Newark, or in Minneapolis, or in Maputo, or in Havana. They will continue to challenge for power. And that challenge will continue to be manifest and to escalate, because we are not given a position at that table. By engaging in dialogue and discussion, as we have attempted in our local community in Boston over the course of this year, through a series of Sankofa conversations that I hope my colleagues will expand upon more, that we've carried out this year. If people are not engaged with their truth, and if we do not hear each other, and if we're not willing to listen to each other, that table will be knocked down and destroyed. And the scale of the more than 25 million people who demonstrated across this country, the vast majority of peacefully, will expand and it will grow, just as we saw these international demonstrations in support of that truth. Now, if we're to move to solutions, this issue of raising our consciousness, in community terms that folks talk about, you got to get woke. You got to get woke. And you can only get woke if you're willing to listen. Listen to other voices and other truths. Now, that does not mean that there is an alternative set of facts. There's one set of facts, but there can be multiple truths. And we have to be willing to listen, to hear, and to challenge ourselves to change, because we cannot change the world until we change ourselves. Until we do that internal work of transformation and of challenging. But there must also then be a shift in the very paradigm. We've seen this now in some cases around the country with regard to the question of police and the power relationship with communities, and how power is being implemented. What, in fact, is our conception of the role that the police should have within our communities? That is being challenged. And we see manifestations of how this can, in fact, be transformed. Newark, which has been notorious over decades through the power of a consent decree, has not had not one police homicide this year. And we can go back and look at all the data, but one thing that is important, you see, I don't want to resurrect all of that, because the demographics of death follow Blacks wherever we go. But since that George Floyd homicide, there have been over 1,000 police shootings in America. 48 Black men have been killed, one a week. We know the name of George Floyd. How many do we not know? But we have to reconceptualize the role of community security. Defunding the police doesn't mean you eliminate security in your community. It means you transform your paradigm, the way you look at what that means and how we engage that. Our strategies for change need to engage and to work with those of our elected officials who are on the inside of a system. We at this point cannot give up on that system, but we have to work as we challenge it to work with those who are willing to push forward change, to push forward the George Floyd piece of legislation that their Congress is currently struggling with. It's been suggested that the issue of qualified immunity is the last lever that they have to be able to negotiate. Now, I'm not sure how you negotiate. If immunity is already qualified, how much more do you need to qualify it? But they're trying to work with that, struggling with that issue. Those on the inside need us to work on the outside, to work for that kind of change. Those who are in the system, who are the gatekeepers of the system, need to open the gate. But you get inside and you can get real comfortable. Now, these challenges, if we're going to really focus on some solutions to what has occurred. But lastly, I'd like to say, as we're struggling with this issue of solutions, it needs to be in the context of a pluriversalism that looks at multiple centers of change and transformation. That our conversations about being woke and how do we engage these issues need to happen within a multi-ethnic context. You see, part of the dynamic of the institutionalization of racism is that it not only must address the question of white supremacy and the internalization of those ideas, but within our community of those who are oppressed, there has been an internalization of our own oppression. And that can become manifest in an inter-ethnic set of conflicts and tensions. Racenicity is real. And the duality of the contradiction of both race and ethnicity are challenges we must address. So not only must society engage that dialectic of race and the construction of that and its implication, but we internally must address our own internal contradictions. And the construction of a pluralistic vision is one that can help to move us forward. I'd like to end here, and I'm sure that Dr. Ferguson is going to challenge us even further in our conversation dialogue. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your thoughts. Very profound in their perspectives. And I am debating with myself about whether or not I should share my own perspectives or get us into dialogue at the moment. My dialogue is going to take us into a direction of looking very deep into the psyche. And part of what that means, however, is that as we look very deeply into the psyche, we're going to need to grapple with something that I call the dark unknown archetype. And that dark unknown archetype, in my estimation, has been very misused as it's been applied individually and systemically around race relations. So let me chime into that, and then we can come back to some discussion. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to kind of introduce what I mean, and then we'll come back to see if we can have a little bit of discussions. So I'm going to do a share, actually. As a way to try to have a visual representation of some things that I want to get out. This has to do with what does it mean to be black male in America? And when I look at that from this perspective, I actually see it as a multidimensional experience. Our beingness has us having to challenge ourselves around what it means to be Black, what it means to be male, and what it means to be American. That's system stuff that's at play. And whether or not we choose to engage that system in order to change it, or whether or not we choose to opt out of it in some way. In that experience, for me, it's kind of like being a participant observer in our life spaces. And I think about our life spaces in three ways. That we have a personal life space. That's that space that we live in, where we have direct encounters with people, events, and circumstances, and we form a lot of thoughts and feelings around them. Then we have a societal life space. That's all the stuff that we may not necessarily have direct encounters with, they're indirect, but they have social consequences in terms of our feelings and thoughts and systems that get created, that have impact, real impact. And similarly, on a global scale, it's indirect in the sense that we're not there in the person, but we know about it and from a global standpoint. So I think about our experiences mostly as occurring in what I call a psychohistorical context. And psychohistorical refers to the notion that as human events unfold, there's a psychology of the times at play, which uniquely frames our individual and collective experiences in consciousness. And so I think there is a psychology of the times right now, which is calling for a reckoning. And it's a reckoning around race-linked, our individual and collective race-linked creations. We are the creators of all of this. Globally, societally, we either cause things to happen or we allow it. And from a white supremacist point of view, we've caused a lot of stuff. But all of this happens also generationally in our personal, societal, and global life spaces. So how do I put that in the context of George Floyd? I think about it, George Floyd is just one of many iconic events that have occurred. In fact, 5 days from now, there's another one which nobody doesn't get a lot of play. And it's the Tulsa Massacre. It happened 5 days from now. It's the 100th anniversary of that particular incident. A lot of people online right now may not even heard about the Tulsa Massacre. That had to do with what was commonly called the Black Wall Street in Tulsa. And there was an interchange that took place between a Black male, 19 years old, young white woman, 17 years old. And she claimed that he grabbed her arm in an elevator. And that led to a flare-up that mushroomed into a massacre. A massacre. The whole town was burnt down. Thousands of folks were killed. The 100th anniversary of that is coming up. Not a lot of talk about it, except that there was, in fact, testimony by one of the survivors. She's 107 years old. She testified before Congress about her experiences. I started to play that. I have a video of her testifying, and I almost brought that here, but I didn't want to deter from what we're talking about today. So the psychology of the times is calling for this reckoning right now about our race-linked creations. What are we going to do about it? So here's the perspective that I bring to this conversation. I think about, as human beings, we are meaning makers, and that we are also symbolic creatures. So a lot of what we've been talking about is the symbolism that's contained in the George Floyd event. Very visceral, reaches very deep into the soul. And one of the interesting things in my own journeys inward, discovering a lot of things about the language of the soul. And the language of the soul has a lot of vibrational sounds to it, and there's a lot of pictorial things that happen. And the way we experience, however, consciously is that we feel those vibrational sounds of the soul in our bodies. And we see images in our mind from the soul. A lot of it comes to us in our dreams, but we get a lot of images. So when we think about that, from the George Floyd event, from how the soul speaks to us, that event captured visually through the video recording and the sound of George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," and calling out to mama, vibrationally now resonated at an individual and collective soul level. That is the enactment of that event for all to experience, calling to us, speaking to us vibrationally, harmonizing with our individual and collective human experiences, capturing the imagination across the globe. Now, there have been several other events where that happens, but this is the one that we're talking about in terms of the psychology of the times. And I also think about the idea that there's a deep wound within our human psyche that requires healing, which all of you have been speaking about. And it relates to our past and present inability to simply comprehend and to appreciate human distinctions and differences at individual and collective levels. It's also related to our attempt as human beings to to make meaning out of our awareness of and experience with light and dark. And here, this is where the dark unknown archetype comes into play. But that wound is very much involved with not understanding the nature of the dark unknown archetype and misusing it in a way that it gets projected out in highly negative ways and gets formulated into systems of thinking and systems of ways in which to structure institutions and realities. So if you look across the globe, the folks that get the oppression, for the most part, are darker complected folks. And that's a misuse of the dark unknown archetype. Perspective I also bring is that healing really cannot take place until a wound is recognized, that it's acknowledged, it's diagnosed, and strategically dealt with. And this is Jim Madonna, and this is where some of your ideas around solutions come in. You got to diagnose what's so. Then figure out ways in which you can deal with things strategically. And the fact that people don't recognize or acknowledge something, you can't deal with it if you don't acknowledge it. It's like it's out of mind, out of sight. And therefore, one wants to wish that it isn't there. And I intentionally brought all three of you on board here because I know that you know these experiences directly. Because we've fought together in the trenches around many of these things. So this wound, however, and the misuse of the dark unknown archetype relates to the Black male and Black masculinity as it gets played out by those who are in authority, who happen to be white mostly. And that superiority kind of thing that emerges in relationship to it. And so this psychohistorical context right now is crying out for justice, crying out for restorative justice. And as Tony was mentioning, it connects us to the historic and multi-generational drama that has unfolded. Now, let me say a little bit of a word about what I actually think the dark unknown archetype actually represents. In my view, the dark unknown archetype represents the higher vibrational multi-dimensional time-space energies, actually timeless and spaceless energy field, from which infinite consciousness and infinite light multi-dimensions emerge and are given birth and form and meaning. In my last book, where I talk about, which is called Evolving the Human Race Game, I took a deep dive into looking at this, and what emerged out of that was what I call 25 archetypal energies. All of them are very positive. And they lead to transformation, positive transformation. But that was diving into the dark unknown archetype. So the purpose, the true purpose of the dark unknown archetype is to help all that is, however you want to define all that is, to continue to create and to uncover more about itself. Now that's a deep, universal, cosmic kind of impulse that's at play. It's a cosmic impulse. And I'm not the first one to try to get there. There are many, many visions that have occurred. One is a Mayan vision. I won't go into detail around that, but there's an imagery that emerged around the tree of life where there's a light thing that looks like a cross at the center of the universe. But even in the Mayan tradition, it talks about that's growing out of an underground, which is interesting. The ancient Chinese philosophers tried to deal with this light-dark thing, to try to understand it through the yin-yang principles. Interesting enough, they reversed the thing. So light actually in yin was kind of looked at as negative. It's the yin here. And yang is the dark thing. Now scientists, this is kind of representation of it. I'm not going to go into details around all of this, but here you get into female and male kind of things that got represented through that particular framework. Our current scientists right now are trying to understand this thing through the cosmology. And so they've done that by looking at what they call dark matter and dark energy. And these are just some pictorial representations. Right now, for example, what we call visible matter just represents 5% of things. Dark matter is 27%, and dark energy is 6 to 8%. This is just a pictorial representation of what happened through the Big Bang, from the scientific point of view, leading through the Dark Ages up through the expansion, continual expansion of the universe. And what scientists are saying right now is that they don't know what this dark energy is, but it seems to be the fuel that's driving the expansion of the universe. The dance between dark energy and dark matter. Those are the metaphors that are being used in science right now. So I tie that in also then with the challenges that humanity has used to try to figure out the various cultures and systems. And so there are actually 5 different kind of challenges that are at play that we try to deal with. One is how do we deal with time, past, present, and future? So some cultures place a lot of emphasis on the past. Some cultures, like the United States, place a lot of emphasis on the future. And it drives things. And it reduces, when you focus so much there, then people get reduced. There's a mechanistic way that begins to get entertained, and it drives folks toward not living so much in the present. African-American culture has kind of like this present-future focus, more present-oriented, but looking toward the future, but not necessarily entrenched in the future per se. And the second struggle or challenge has to do with what are the preferred patterns in action in our interpersonal relationships. So there are 3 kind of things that we can focus on. We can focus on our doing, we can focus on how we are, our beingness, or we can focus on beingness and becoming, which is who are we as we're becoming something. That is one of the challenges that unfolds. Third one has to do with our preferred way of relating in groups. Do we focus simply on the individual autonomy, which is kind of the focus in the United States, or is it really the responsibility to the collective? Do we create our experiences in group as a collateral things? That is, do we prefer to have a collective responsibility toward things? It's a lot of the African tradition here. Or do we create a lineal kind of way of relating in groups, which is this hierarchical thing, which is kind of more related to the white supremacist approach to group issues. And the fourth one is how humanity should relate to nature. Should we live in harmony with nature? Should we have mastery over nature, or should we feel subjugated to nature? Now, there's a lot of push, even in this forum, having to do with living with nature. But interesting enough, it's really a lot of the talk in this particular forum is transforms that into saying we are nature. Because all three of these can lead to fear and generate fear if you don't really see yourself as nature. And then the fifth struggle, a challenge, is what do we think about our nature as human beings? Are we basically good? Are we basically evil? Or are we kind of like this tabula rasa, where it's neutral or mixed, but it can be written on? And those three orientations also come into play. There's a lot more I can say about this, but I'm looking at the time here. But if you look at some of the history, you'll see some of the struggles that have gone on within our community. We know that there's these. We're actually one of the peoples that because of the multidimensionality of our experience, get involved with looking at the meaning of what Blackness is. And we do that by this process of discovering what Cross calls the Black referent. And there are stages that you can go through. So we don't have time to go into all of these stages here, but there are about 5 different stages that are part of the discovering the Black referent. That Black referent, by the way, is a metaphor for the unknown, the dark unknown archetype. And in discovering that, we discovered a lot of power. And I'm gonna suggest that there's a lot of fear on the part of the whites who are stuck about the power of Black males. A lot of fear that's involved, and there's this sense of wanting to contain it, and therefore oppress it, try to put it in some box, enslave it. And so some of that's been at play. Now I outlined here a whole lot of themes, and I won't go into that. If people are interested in that, they can get a hold of this book here, the Transitions in Consciousness from an African American Perspective, to get a better sense of what we're talking about in terms of themes, that interplay between dark and light as it's gotten played out. So I'm gonna end my little thing there, and let's see if I can get out of here. Stop here. Okay. Now let's see if we can talk to each other a little bit. There's a question that came up in one of these things having to do with how people feel about the impact of Trump and Trumpism on what happened with George Floyd and systemic racism. Anybody don't care to comment about that?
Well, just real quickly, Cuff, I think that it's almost in some ways, I won't say the reverse of the diagram that you put up, and you explaining, like dark unknown archetype. So, when you deal with Trump, you're looking at something that opposes the notion of being Black, being American, and being male, as well as being female. But you kind of get into, and you talk of souls, you start getting into Du Bois's book, Souls of Black Folk.
Yes.
But when we talk of American, we're not just talking about United States of America. We're talking about South America, North America, Central America, and where Black people are, this whole global space where we are. But, looking at this, this diagram, when I look at it, I go like, this is it. They could almost use this as, for people who go to firing range, use it as a target practice, because, in terms of what this actually represent, you speak of fear, but it represents a threat to white supremacy.
Okay.
And so it's, it's like a sort of a dangerous proposition. I just recently I was driving to the shopping mall, and I was coming out, of the parking lot, and a police car had on all the blue lights, and I sort of stopped, and as soon as I put my hand right on the dashboard, right, then he turned it off and he beeped his horn for me to move. So I don't know, what it was, but the idea is that my whole mechanism, is such that I, that this is almost automatic, because I know what can happen to me. I'm someone who have been beaten up by police several times, have been arrested several times for, nothing that I've done. I mean, stopped in the street where a police officer, undercover police, just stopped me and put a pistol in my stomach. And it took me 45 minutes to walk up and down Mass Avenue to calm down. So it's just, we're so, to be a Black male in America, to be a Black person in America, is that there's a certain, I was so responding a different way, into a dangerous way. We're like a dangerous environment, whether we're walking the streets or we're at work or we're in the academy. It's a danger, and we cannot live like that. We cannot live like that. And in some ways, it's not about the sort of people in the neighborhood who want to burn down stores. It is the rage that we experience working in the academy, working in these other places, that constantly harms us. Even sometimes, even trying to talk about it, it invokes, a certain feelings, not just our immediate experience, but our historical experience. And the change is that, it's like, what are the solutions? They're not easy solutions, but the solutions are things that we have to resist by any means necessary. The dehumanization of of us as human beings, who are Black people, and for anybody, for that fact, that we have to stand up in a forceful way, not to allow this to continue. Because I think, as Jim Adari, alluded to, is that we're playing with a powder keg. Something that can really, at any minute, you talk of like time and so forth, at any moment can just go poof, can just blow up, for the slightest thing, because it triggers all those other things that has happened. It doesn't have to be a major thing. It could be a little thing. We hear of this in neighborhoods where someone got shot because they brushed against someone or their sneaker or something. It was this stuff that just was building up. And that's where we are. And the system tries to calm us down a little bit. They give us a scholarship, or they give us a director of diversity or something, or something, to avoid addressing the fundamental problem, of treating us like human beings. And so it has to stop. It has to stop now, or, just, I don't know how you say prepare for it, but we have to, do some real internal work, some real deep work around respecting, the humanity of people. I don't care who they are, male, female, whatever, however they want to identify themselves. We have to begin to address this immediately.
Well, I just want to share very briefly 2 experiences I had with police. One in an early age of my life, and one that happened a little bit later. And they're contrasting in the sense that I was in a very different emotional space. The first one happened when I first came to Boston, and I literally got arrested for doing absolutely nothing. I was walking in the dark. It was early in the morning, and I was going to visit my my roommate, and it was too early to wake them up. So I said, I haven't seen Boston. Let me just walk around in the city. And as I was walking around, this paddy wagon came along, and 2 police officers jumped out of the paddy wagon and said, what are you doing around here? And I said, I'm just window shopping. And they said to me, that's a likely story. And then all of a sudden, there's another police chief's car came along. And I don't know if these guys wanted to look big and bad in their eyes. And these are 2 white officers. But it said, they pushed me against the paddy wagon and said, get in. Now they had taken my wallet out, so they knew that I was a college student, and I was dressed up with a sports coat on, so I wasn't dressed in any kind of hoodie or anything like that. And they took me down to this station. They didn't put me in a cell, but they had me to sit beside the sergeant's desk, and then came out maybe about an hour later, kind of like, he, can you sign this piece of paper? Now, the piece of paper was that I wasn't going to press charges for false arrest. And I was like this little naive kid from the South. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. So I signed it and what have you. And then I called my roommate and talked to the father, and they happened to be white. And he said, oh, Cuff, you shouldn't have signed that. We would have come and got you. But that was my first experience. I mean, I've had others, but the other one was an interesting one where I was driving from UMass Boston, and there was 2 cars. I was driving right beside 2 cars, my car and the other car. And one of them, and the other guy was, the other person was a white person. And there was a police officer. Now he pulled me over. He didn't pull the other guy over, pulled me over. And he said, y'all look like y'all were racing. I said, no, I wasn't racing. I was just driving. So when he approached me, to the car, he did his whole thing with his stern voice, driver's license, blah, that kind of stuff. So I actually internally shifted to a very different space. Now, I'm not going to say everybody's to do this because it may not work, but I shifted to internally to a different space inside of me, which vibrationally created a different kind of tone. And I simply said to him in a very calm voice, you're not a very nice person, are you? Now, he went back to his car. He sat in his car for about 10 minutes. And then he came back out, and he didn't give me a ticket or anything like this. I'm not going to give you a ticket, blah, blah, blah. And then he looked at me and said, am I a nice person? Those are two interesting experiences. So
You're lucky. You're lucky. You could have got shot for that.
I know. Okay. All right, we pretty much close to time. I think that Kevin had to drop off, but we kind of like at the end. So I'm just going to ask both of you to, if you have any closing remarks, just to share it with us, and then I want to play this other little song as a way to close out. So any closing remarks you have, Tony or Jemadar?
Jemadar?
Yes, I want to just pick up on a couple of things that you had said there, because this question of fear and reckoning are issues that have come up in the conversation. And I think that they are powerful motive forces that drive our behavior. This idea of fear, while it is often cloaked in the veneer of dominance and power, I think is very frequently the underlying motive force and the energy that we see as being manifest. The fear of the loss of power is what I see driving much of the behavior of white supremacy that we see now. It's manifest internally in the context of the United States and in our local communities, but it is that loss of power as we see the changing global demographic. And it's happening before the eyes of white America. And this fear of the loss of power and control of this system is not only in their neighborhood and in their community, but in this country. And Trump represented the articulation of the last vestige of the supremacy and the fact that this lie that he has perpetrated can continue to go on. Even this morning, it was very interesting as people began to have some commentary in the popular media, and the Republican voices. They had one of these groups where people are talking, and among the Republican voices, over 60% of people of the Republicans still believe that lie, that somehow Trump was swindled. It wasn't just Trump. Trump becomes the representation of that fear of the loss of dominance and power in this society. And they begin to see this being manifest, and this Black police chief is being appointed here, and the school committee, we're losing that, we lose left and right. That's what I see. And there's a reckoning that the society has to come to, that without the engagement with the so-called other, you have shaped this analytically in a very interesting way, Cup. I find this and I want to pursue this conversation with you about this Black
Dark Unknown
Archetype.
Yeah.
Because this has been manifest historically. They articulate it in different ways, but this notion of the other and the whole negritude movement and so forth, this representation of the other, and always cloaked in blackness, darkness, that representation. So there's historical precedent for that, but it is coming to this reckoning. And I'll just close with this comment that you mentioned that some of the work that I'd done on Cabral before. And Cabral was talking to the neo-colonial elite. And he talked about the necessity for there to be class suicide. Now, who in their right mind would commit suicide? He was speaking to, in this context, to the African elite, the petty bourgeoisie, and the requisite imperative to align themselves with the masses of people who were pushing for the transformation and the liberation of their society. But what he was saying actually is that if you do not understand your interest to be fundamentally as a human being allied with the least of us, your desire to continue to accumulate for self-aggrandizement, for your position of individual power and authority will totally be lost unless you understand the basis of your humanity in alignment with all of us. And I see that where we are now. That we, particularly in the United States, but in the so-called West or North, or however you want to define us, if we do not understand our alignment, the imperative for our alignment, for the basic interests of all of humanity, that which we are attempting to hold on to, whether it's power or our authority or our money or whatever that is, without eliminating the enormous gap of inequality that exists, we're going to lose all of that, because the people will not allow this to continue with these kinds of inequity. And so we have to struggle with the dialogue and the conversations and continue to push that forward. We've made some small steps forward in our community, and we'll continue to engage in those struggles as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Jemadar. Tony, do you have a final words for us?
I want to add to that. I think in terms of dialogue is that we have to ratchet up a little bit. We have to have many more difficult conversations, and hopefully those can offer, could be transformative for people, because, when I look at this period, and I look at what the government is doing, what the legislation is doing, in terms of this constant voter suppression, just denying the basic democracy of people, something that they've done, as this country was engaged in a civil war and going into Reconstruction, that they've continued to do that, and that when you talk of Black Wall Street and Greenwood, in terms of the kind of atrocities that were committed, that all of that is still very possible, in that we see it, an individual, basis, is that we really have to see the urgency of now in a real sense, because this question of fear, this question of the shifting demographics and so forth, is alarming, and this global demographics is alarming, the sort of the people who have aligned themselves with Trump, in terms of these ideas, in terms of practicing this kind of white supremacy and domination. We have a lot of work. We had a very serious and critical moment, and that as people try to go on with their lives and try to get beyond this pandemic, there is not a new normal. That we have to create a new society, and hold on to values that honor all of our humanity, or otherwise we're going to be in some deep trouble.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm going to leave with two things here. One is I want to challenge the audience and all of humanity, actually, to change the connotation that we apply to the experience and word dark, to change the connotation. If you look at the narratives or the language that we use to describe things to ourselves, we use dark in a very negative way. That is, dark cloud, dark times, anything that doesn't seem to be, we use that as the verbiage to describe. And this is how we're talking to ourselves. So I want to challenge everybody to change the connotation. And in changing the connotation, to actually impact one's consciousness as it relates to the phenomena of darkness. And darkness actually is very, you can't, you go to sleep in darkness. It's very healing. You can't do a lot of things without darkness. So, and darkness actually gives meaning to light. But there's a whole lot of stuff that's contained in the connotations and in the way in which we phrase our language to ourselves, and actually in framing it that way, we're also speaking to this universal energy that then pull forth certain kind of events that appear to us as being very unseemly. So we need to change the way we talk to ourselves, and also change the way in which we talk to each other around the issues of dark. So with that, the challenge really is to go into the unknown, the dark unknown. And so toward that end, I just want to share with people as a way of ending this little video clip song. It's sung by actually a group of youth. And it's taken from the movie Frozen. And I intentionally chose that because we are frozen right now. And in our psyches, at a soul level, we are frozen. But for some reason, this song and the writers of it tapped into some very deep symbolic stuff. And this group of youth who are multiracial gave a very nice 2-minute kind of rendition of the song Into the Unknown. So Rich, are you still there? You want to play that for us?
Still here. I'm going to play it for you.
All right. So the video is the thing that's really found, because it's
Cop, we'll try it one more time. We didn't get the
Okay.
video. Yeah.
all right. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Everything's right. Let's give it another shot.
There you go. Okay, so let's follow each other into the unknown.
Cuff, what a tour de force today. Jamadari, Tony, thank you so much. That was powerful, and that was a powerful final musical performance, Cuff, so thank you. Two things come up for me, Cuff and Jamadari and Tony, that I want to just underscore by way of thanking you. I think you've all made a very powerful point about George Floyd that I hadn't really taken in today, until today, but which I've searched for. And that is that the power of his iconic death was the power of a great reckoning. You know, you think of the killing of Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. They were tragic, they meant many things, but there wasn't the note of reckoning. I think that George Floyd's death has been as powerful as the pandemic, because like the pandemic, it signals a reckoning, a very deep, powerful reckoning for humanity. And what I'm seeing as a result of your wisdom today is that they're actually really interconnected. The reckoning of the pandemic and the reckoning of George Floyd are two sides of the same intertwining coin. And humanity is being challenged in ways that are shaking us to the foundations of our identity about who we are. And so I want to thank you for bringing that into my awareness with the perspicacity with which you've articulated these issues. And I'm very grateful to you. And then out of that, I think, and that's the brilliance of what you've brought in, Cuff, around the dark, unknown archetype. I think that's very profound, because when you come into a state of reckoning, you are encountering the dark unknown. And I have right here, this is the Black Madonna.
Yes.
This is the Black Madonna of Rock Amador, considered the most potent of all the Black Madonnas in Europe. And the Black Madonna, that dark energy, is that energy which takes all the darkness, the malignancy of our own transgressions, intermingles it with the darkness of the cosmos, and somehow catalyzes it into a momentum that redeems. You think of Kali in the Hindu tradition. You think of Durga, you think of Kuan Yin, you think of these dark, chthonic, feminine archetypal functions, and you've brought in that almost the masculine side of that darkness. That's where the reckoning is reckoned. And it's about breathing, it's about respiration. And all those came together with the pandemic and George Floyd. We're now all being brought into that deep archetypal process. And the choices we now make, which is your last point, Jamadari, I thank you for it. The choices we now make are going to determine whether the dark unknown consumes us, and it well may, or redeems us. If the choices we make in the interplay of the light and the darkness are held with a consciousness of apology for everything that we have done, and a forgiveness for all being. So you gentlemen have gone really deep today. And I want to salute you and thank you for it. And Cuff, I would like to schedule a whole other session and bring some folks together to look at that dark, unknown archetype, because that's where humanity is. And I think the Trump phenomenon is a portal into the abyss of self-destruction if we don't grapple with these archetypal energies with the intent for human renewal. So thank you, my good friends. I have deeply appreciate this. And I want you back.
Thank you so much, Jim. It was really our pleasure. And thank you, Jamadari, and thank you, Tony. Masterful, man.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank you, Cuff and Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. And then tomorrow, we're going to have a dialogue. We thought we would just jump into a dialogue about healing in America. Larry Dawsey and a number of others are going to be just talking about how we can grapple with these issues in a spirit of just simple openness to a deeper layer of truth that only emerges out of deep dialogue. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising, convened by George Campanelli. So thank you, everyone. Cuff, Tony, Jamadari, thank you very, very deeply on behalf of us all. And we'll see you all again tomorrow, everyone, on Humanity Rising, same time, same station. And for those of you who want to join our after session chat, the link is in the chat box, and we look forward to deepening the dialogue. Thank you all. Bye for now.
Thank you. All right.
Great session, Cuff.
Thank you, man.
Good job. Good job.
All right.